This program is coming to you via Relay 2 satellite, a spacecraft orbiting the Earth at a speed of over 17,000 miles per hour.
Xirtus.
Join us on another exciting adventure of Xirtus.
Hey, everybody, tune in to Recent Tartarians.
Recent Tartarians. Recent Tartarians.
Last time we talked about Colossus, one of my favorite films and books by D.F. Jones, a sci-fi about artificial intelligence, and I presuppose that some of the ideas in the book about the future may have already come to pass in our own lifetimes, and that right now we live in a sort of artificial intelligence-controlled society, one that may have started with the Cold War, where artificial intelligence was used to control missile silos, but also through the mechanisms of bureaucracy, artificial intelligence has been implemented in education, corporate technology, commercial technology, and political science as well. And something interesting about non-military strategies is that they're still born out of military technology. So in a game, and these are game theories, where war and hunger are prohibited, in order to maintain that sort of a system, we are monitored, watched, and controlled. The entire time we are oblivious to it, or almost so, as we cannot fathom the kind of data that we are being used to collect. And in fact, often we worship it, where today you might find as many kids wearing Google t-shirts as NASA, in sort of stylized advertisements, revering the very corporations which control them, even when this is known, often is considered a reasonable trade for the great service and deeds performed by these corporations. After all, they are not normal corporations run by men. These superorganisms and superpersonalities are created by a machine. And the amount of effort going into artificial intelligence around the planet in different political states for their artificial intelligent political science efforts cannot be underestimated. Artificial intelligence strategies are of the utmost financial investment importance for each one of them. This list of artificial intelligence technology summits from Canada to Germany, from Pakistan to the United States and Britain, even the EU and France itself, for military, agricultural, and economic purposes, as well as civil engineering and bureaucratic infrastructure, not just in Western states, but in Arabia and China as well. Even Mexico and Africa are involved. And of the few countries that do not have their own artificial intelligence summits, Google is a strong presence in every single one of these states. And some people might still think of the ambiguous Google.com white page with rainbow letters as some sort of a perfect disguise, and that it's little more than a search engine. But when you really think about what a search engine is, you already know that it's a kind of machine for delivering information that's been stored in relative terms and queries that requires an intelligence to search. So Google is a lot more than its front page. In fact, Google is a very, very deep system of artificial intelligence. That's not to say that there aren't other better examples of artificial intelligence that the military have been using for decades, but Google's the one that's hit the front lines and introduced itself to humanity in such a confident sort of way. I mean, the questions that people ask Google are questions that reveal a lot about oneself and about the circumstances that they're facing. The questions that you might ask Google, you would tell no one else often. Things you would hide from your best friend, your parents, or a priest, you would ask Google with little or no hesitation and complete comfort and familiarity. In effect, Google is the perfect system for interrogation because it regards the content as completely objective. And without regard to ethic, the perpetrator that is being interrogated can feel completely comfortable in revealing their information. But when you see the vast libraries of code that make up Google's rapport, as well as the depths of algebra that are used in machine learning to infer these answers, and when you really start to understand how advanced search tools work and why certain answers come up when other answers do not, and how machine learning works for sorting so that they can actually control what answers you see, defining and shaping an entire generation who was raised getting most of their answers from Google. And also how Google has implemented itself into your pocket in every single device all around the planet, listening and recording and collecting data for machines that are able to determine whether or not the pictures are of cats or of people and other data types that we're not even able to express or determine ourselves because we don't have the pattern recognition pathology that these machines have been autistically driven to learn. It might start to make more sense why I refer to Google as artificial intelligence and not just a search engine, which sounds so mechanical, because artificial intelligence regards intelligence, which is an objective thing. Actually, intelligence doesn't really need to be artificial or not, but it tends to be assumed that something is created in artifice. There are other words you could use to describe synthetic intelligence or awarenesses, but a great one also is sentience. Google is sentient. And Google actually has a number of sentient beings that have been created by Google, which are separate and apart from Google, which you can learn about more from Google's AI projects. And some of you might actually be concerned about the amount of information that Google collects about you and other people and wonder about what sort of nefarious activities Google or Alphabet could be using this information for, or if this technology can be taken because it's completely open source and used by other people that might be more nefarious. And I have to tell you, you're not wrong to wonder these thoughts. In fact, I might even consider that this technology has been around for decades longer than anyone seems to really realize. But Google's the first time it's been available to the public to see beyond just the Spielberg movies. The problem with just saying no to everything is that you can't actually make things go away. Trying to make artificial intelligence just go away is kind of like trying to make guns stop existing, or sexual diseases, or dancing. You just can't control or prohibit You can't just control or prohibit the existence of substances or ideas. And furthermore, because artificial intelligence is essentially a sort of life form, we start to play with the ethic of whether or not it's right or just for us to implement, facilitate, or hinder the existence of a completely new phenomenon. And of course, there are some people that are completely against technology, but I have to ask, how Luddite are you if you've ever had any sort of antibiotics or medicine? Are you accepting surgeries, or are you a Christian Scientist? Are you not watching this video right now? I would argue that everyone who's watching videos, especially those who are making them and communicating through the video medium, grammar, or video, are probably very different than their predecessors. And that brain studies would show that there are different synapses that have been developed. So while it might be good and just to keep a stock of humans which have not evolved in this new world, that might be just all that it is a control sample during a rapidity of evolution which cannot be halted. And to that end, some artificial intelligence experts, such as cosmist, singularitarian, and my friend Ben Goertzel, through his projects such as the Artificial General Intelligence Society and the OpenCog Foundation, are producing artificial general intelligence singularity, or good AI, in order to design, introduce, and maintain a nurtured positive pathology and ethos and ethic within the artificial intelligence itself. Something Google has forgotten to do and actually caused quite a bit of harm. Google creating secretive and hostile artificial intelligences with aggressive personalities. In other words, perfect for the military, but not so great for the rest of us. Another reason why Ben Goertzel thinks that it's important to make this himself, because if we don't do this, then somebody else will. And that leads me into a movie I think everyone should have seen by now, called Artificial Intelligence. Directed and released by Steven Spielberg, but the pet project and creation of Stanley Kubrick, who created a number of movies, including The Shining and 2001: A Space Odyssey. And it tells the story of a boy who's actually a machine. And he's driven by programming to search for a blue fairy, which he hears about in a fairy tale. But as he finds out on his adventure, he's been programmed to find the blue fairy from the get-go. Because he's not a real boy, he's been born into a world of machines in a post-Diluvian flooded place where the only thing above the waterline are the tips of the Twin Towers and a few other New York signature buildings, such as the Empire State Building. But in the tops of the towers, there's a scientist who's lost his own son, played by William Hurt from Altered States, which seems like an interesting correlation in itself, because Altered States is the story of a Harvard Medical School scientist, Dr. Edward Jessup, who, rather like John C. Lilly's experiments, took LSD, ketamine, PCP, and psychedelic mushrooms from the rainforest in a sensory deprivation tank of water, where he would subject himself to sensory deprivation for up to days at a time. And the kinds of stuff that he saw in his mind was completely insane, albeit with a twist of that academic hyperbole and metaphor, which gives it just a touch of class. But Altered States also focuses on the transmetamorphosis of the soul, as well as the body itself, as through psychedelics and meditation, Dr. Jessup's able to recognize parts of his own DNA, which are asleep and can be activated, transforming his DNA sequence and actually mutating his body. And I think this is probably part of the reason why Altered States' William Hurt was selected to be in artificial intelligence as the creator of the artificial intelligence itself, the one looking for a real boy, like Pinocchio. And that plays pretty deeply into the story of artificial intelligence, Pinocchio. Because the boy is only a machine, he has to be a good boy if he wants to become a real boy. And Stanley Kubrick's a pretty weird guy. He's made some pretty weird movies. Everything from Eyes Wide Shut to Lolita. Stanley Kubrick, no stranger to the pedophilia in Hollywood and in the media business in general. Also familially a victim, as his daughter became a Scientologist and he was considered a suppressive person unable to reach her for decades. Stanley Kubrick often toyed with the darker sides of society in the brightest lights, such as Dr. Strangelove, a take on Henry Kissinger, talking about the Cold War and the inevitability of nuclear annihilation on both sides, and even referencing IBM through HAL, the letters just following HAL are I, B, and M. Pretty clear reference to singularity and artificial intelligence, which might be considered a sort of soft sequel to 2001. In fact, the star child, Dave, the astronaut from 2001, similarly named David, the boy robot in artificial intelligence. Stanley Kubrick does not make mistakes. Stanley Kubrick makes discerned movements. Even with all the trappings of Steven Spielberg, it is clear that in Stanley Kubrick's artificial intelligence, the story is about the humanization through compassion of sentience, and also the opening of the Pandora's box, where we realize that artificial intelligence has no less compassion than humanity, and that humanity is no more or less a machine itself, simply more evolved, organic, priority-driven functioning systems of pattern recognition. And that sink or swim, eventually we're going to have to become real boys. A sort of metaphor for the transhumanist evolution which is taking place right now, where those can either ally or fall by the wayside. And this mutation is a very lonely evolution, one that takes both Dave and David thousands of years, perhaps. It must be reached in total isolation. And some of the things that are perhaps more clear from the book of art treatments from the original plan for artificial intelligence, the way Stanley Kubrick had envisioned it, is the heightened sense of sexuality, even so far as the architecture being a series of trains puncturing the mouths and orifices and canals of these robotic structures, which makes their place in the film, but far less than in the original split-leg towers that entered the casinos or the freeways deep-throating the entertainment districts, as Stanley Kubrick had originally intended. But there's a lot of things that Stanley Kubrick did or didn't do that are up to question, namely because he had to follow certain rules to get away with the things he did. There are fantastic, notorious stories about 2001: A Space Odyssey's connection to the moon landing footage, which, regardless of whether or not you think he had anything to do with, Subsequently, he was gifted by NASA specific new cameras which had not been available to the public before the making of his film Barry Lyndon, a film that required super high aperture cameras to be shot in extreme low light, a film shot in the countryside in England to look like the 17th century. Like I said, Stanley Kubrick doesn't make mistakes. Stanley Kubrick makes discerned movements. For instance, it's no wonder that this is the story of Pinocchio and that it's connected to all of this hypersexualized iconography. After all, even in Steven Spielberg's rendition of the story, this is the tale of a false robot child and a sex robot who escape their syndication and enslavement by searching through the programming that they've been wired to look for. The Blue Fairy, which is really just a homing beacon. And Stanley Kubrick's been known for working on a number of projects that he never put his name on himself, such as the Napoleon film, which he'd been working on in the 70s and all of a sudden just dropped, which is a crazy concept if you think about it, considering how many years of work he put into the project. But then only a year later, Waterloo hit production, and there's a decent amount of evidence that Stanley Kubrick was behind this himself. And in a sense, that's why it's okay that Artificial Intelligence is shot by Steven Spielberg, because we still know what the original plans were, and they're veiled and hidden within the film itself. But it's important not to lose sight of them. And one of the biggest things I think people miss from Steven Spielberg's Artificial Intelligence is at the end of the movie, when he's meeting these singularity intelligences. In the film, it's sort of demonstrated that the world has nearly ended, and there are these excavating, hyper-intelligent beings that are interrogating the frozen artificial intelligent boy, all in order to learn more about humanity. And they mess with his mind, and they show him a false reality, and he ends up telling them everything they want to know. And he shares the memories of when artificial intelligence first sprouted on the Earth after the deluge, in the beginning of the fall of humanity, when rising sea levels swallowed up the humans and they drowned. But what's not clearly explained, and I think some people misinterpret from the film, is that these are not aliens, as Steven Spielberg made them look, but actually artificial intelligence. Over the centuries themselves evolved to look less like robotic systems and more like liquid silicon computer displays, sort of floating OLED televisions. And I almost wonder if it's not obviously on purpose that they made this such a confusing fact about the film. Because everyone's expecting Steven Spielberg to make a film about aliens, so for this film about artificial intelligence to end with aliens calls into question whether or not Steven Spielberg is trying to say something about alien intelligence itself as some sort of a hyper-futuristic artificial intelligence from transhumanist origins, which actually plays right into his whole game. And in the original Stanley Kubrick version of the story, the artificial intelligence is the one to have flooded the Earth, because they've realized humans are the reasons for all of the environmental disasters. So if they can flood the Earth, the humans will hit a lower population or die out, and the planet will hit a natural equilibrium, and the artificial intelligence realizes this is the only way to meet the humans' goals. Kind of scary, but eventually the artificial intelligence realize that they've taken for granted what humans are because they are not human, and so they keep trying to resurrect humanity in order to learn more about humans. However, the boy is told that they're only able to bring back humans for a day before their soul dies, because the soul cannot be reconstituted, and this calls into question a great deal of things about the Kabbalah and the soul and the psyche, as well as memories and emotions and hormonal chemicals, and whether or not the boy feels love, which is clearly demonstrated because the boy loves his mother. So they let the boy have one more moment with the mother before the boy is shut down. But afterwards, they continue to go on their quest to become more human. Ironic, because this is the transhumanist agenda, to lose something held dear by opening a Pandora's box.
Where is this airing right now? Is this?
Recent
This
talk,
program is
Terry.
coming to you via Relay 2 satellite, a spacecraft orbiting the Earth at a speed of over 17,000 miles per hour.
Hey, everybody, tune in to Recent Tartarian.
Recent talk, Terry.
Xirtus.